like to just a bit of housekeeping. If everyone on the call, if they can, use their Zoom to update your profile with your name and your organisation, that will be helpful for facilitators in the breakouts. And just to let you know that today's Zoom is being recorded, but that will be mostly for the presentation and the panel. The breakouts won't be recorded, but we will be having scribes for the breakouts to be able to create an anonymized event report, which we can issue afterwards. So if I'd like to just introduce you to Joe Pike, CEO of the Scottish Wildlife Trust, to open the session.
Thanks very much, Simon. I'll just say a few words briefly. I think it's going to be a really interesting discussion today. We all know about carbon markets, and they're complicated, as Mark Carney has himself kind of discovered, but at least we know what they are, whether it's compliance markets or the voluntary carbon markets. I think in the voluntary space, we know that there are risks. We know that there's no floor price for carbon. They could be seen as a license to emit, and there's all sorts of potential risks around greenwashing if those markets are not subject to proper scrutiny. However, what we also know is that the Woodland Carbon Code and the Peatland Carbon Code are capable of delivering multiple benefits that can help us tackle the nature and the climate crises. So where do biodiversity credits kind of sit in our consciousness? This is a newer concept, and I think the crucial thing is that, even if we believe that voluntary carbon markets through mechanisms such as the Peatland Code and the Woodland Carbon Code can help us deliver benefits, it's nevertheless really important that we don't look at things purely through a carbon lens. We're living in a nature crisis. We know that Antonio Guterres has said that making peace with nature is the defining task of the 21st century. Here in Scotland, we've got an ambitious new Scottish biodiversity strategy in draft form that recognises that we really need to fundamentally change. So if we recognise that the climate crisis and the nature crisis are inextricably linked, we can't tackle one without tackling the other, and the First Minister has already acknowledged that these issues are on an equal footing, and she wants to see Scotland demonstrate leadership in this space. What does that mean in terms of biodiversity, and how do we avoid just looking at things through a carbon lens? So biodiversity credits are starting to emerge as a topic of interest, as they might have the potential to close the financing gap that we know exists in this decade of ecosystem restoration. And I say might because I think it's really important we approach this with an inquiring mindset and look at it from every perspective. And I think that's one of the benefits of having a really inclusive and interdisciplinary conversation with all of you here today. That's how we'll surface opportunities, it's how we'll better understand risks, and it's how we'll avoid unintended consequences. So thanks very much to Simon and others for pulling all of this together today. I look forward to the discussion, and I will have to leave shortly before the end, Simon, but yeah, very, very much look forward to participating. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe. And we were going to have some more scene setting from Catherine Preston from SEPA, but unfortunately she's had a delay. So Catherine will be joining us later on to participate in the breakouts. So we'll just move on with the agenda. But a little bit more scene setting before get starting. So how did we come about pulling together this workshop? It's really based on the role in which the Nature Finance Pioneers Basecamp plays. There's an incredible amount of ideas being generated every day, discussions, and biodiversity credits was something which was picked up by Matt Gledhill, finding a report by the World Economic Forum. And just based on the amount of enthusiasm I received by email and some of the discussions, we really felt this was a good opportunity to discuss this particular matter. It's also part of a series of Zoom seminars I'm hosting, which I call Data Lock. And it's really the idea of Data Lock is to bring people together with an interest in data and innovation, and to explore what problems can be solved. And one really powerful result of some of those discussions was to identify the pain points. What is it that is stopping this private money flowing into Scotland, which we'd want to tackle yesterday. And the idea of this pain point pyramid, which we brought together from sort of expert interviews, is very much from the perspective of experts in green finance, is at the top is what's kind of blocking it. But at the bottom, these are foundational layers which need to be in place as well as the money flows. So at the top, we feel that if there was more regulatory pressure, such as the TNFD at some point, if that created some regulatory pressure to offset on biodiversity, or such as in England where they have the biodiversity net gain policies, that can really help leverage money in. But then it flows through a number of other things which we really could do with mastering or unlocking. And today is very much about the orange, yellow and green layers. That's where biodiversity credits and innovation, of course, come in. But just to sort of find what we mean by credits. So in the case of biodiversity credits, there's a big distinction made by the World Economic Forum between offsets and credits. So today we're going to be talking about credits. And in this case, that means we're not looking at a compliance market, and we are also not looking at things from the perspective of trying to trade off one piece of damage for another. So when we're talking about credits today, it's about the intention of the purchase. So here we're looking for companies, individuals to be buying credits as part of their nature positive journey, an investment in nature recovery, rather than any specific offset for the damage that they're doing. And it's not to say that this definition of credits is better than offsets, but that's what we're discussing today. And part of the philosophy around why we need a credits approach to biodiversity in addition to offsets is that biodiversity is not fungible at a global scale. We can't keep trading off parcels of land with another. We need to bring nature back, and we need to regain a lot of the land lost to biodiversity and bring that back to create a functioning ecosystem. So what could this credits market look like? Well, I guess at the moment, we don't actually know because it hasn't been created yet. But what we can do is expect it to follow something similar to the way that the carbon markets are planned. So this diagram here kind of gives you the general flow of what a credits market looks like. You know, projects will need to select a standard to go for. So in the case of carbon, you have a choice of Plan VIVO and Vera, for example, internationally. But in the UK, we benefit from the peatland code and the woodland carbon code, which provide a lot of high integrity to nature restoration projects and can help provide a framework for broader benefits than just carbon. Then you need to sort of be identifying what method you're going for. So in the case of carbon, it's kind of a set of well-recognized things which are in scope for nature playing a role in carbon sequestration or avoidance. In biodiversity terms, I've just put out a load of ideas because it's food for thought, because as I say, we've not yet formed this credits market, but the opportunity might be for many things to come into scope because we're not just looking at the project through the lens of carbon. We then have your marketplaces and your brokers, and we need to be connected to the buyers of the credits. And another thing I've placed in here, which is being provided by the UNDP, is a sort of oversight to the companies which are and organisations who are beginning to develop biodiversity standards. So we've got Tim Coles today of the WALLACEA Trust, who will be part. Apologies, I've misspelt WALLACEA on this slide again. Who have provided an open source methodology to credits, and that's been really helpful because I'm going to be able to walk through the WALLACEA's Trust's methodology later on in this presentation. But there's a number of private companies and academic institutions and scientists who are beginning to develop standards around this. But then let's also draw back and think about, how does this connect with the Task Force on Nature-related Financial Disclosures? So this task force is still in the early stages. So again, apologies, Helen Avery from the Green Finance Institute wasn't able to make it today, but she provided this slide and some insights to me yesterday to sort of remind us that the journey on TF, we're still early on the TNFD journey. So the direction of travel is to create this kind of periodic table of biomes, and what will result, and ultimately by around 2026, well, there will be some form of offset market being created off this. But you know, open questions we've got: does Scotland have a major offset opportunity? Where are we on this in terms of understanding that? And also another question for us is, what does the ESG CSR market look like for nature's positive only investments such as these credits? These are all open, unanswered questions at this point in time. In terms of the biodiversity credit, there's again, we'll hear more from Tim Cole later, but from various market soundings, we're looking at a credit expected to retail between £10,000 to £50,000 per hectare, compared with a carbon credit of £20 per tonne, although I believe internationally the sale price of carbon credits is much lower than £20. Some of the benefits of biodiversity credits is the idea that these can be stacked on top of carbon. But again, we've got open questions around, can we do that with the existing codes? And then the potential for vintage to play a strong role in there as well. And we'll come on to the other co-benefits in the next slide. So as I say, thanks to the WALLACEA Trust who have open sourced their methodology, we've been able to just provide a bit of an example of how a biodiversity credit methodology might be applied to a riparian woodland example. So there's a few key differences happening here in terms of carbon. So with carbon, we are counting the carbon. We're tracking the underlying asset and turning that metric ton of carbon into pounds and pence. The WALLACEA Trust methodology differs, and this is a methodology which has been picked up by Plan VIVO, but also quite separately come to the same conclusion by Vera, and that's to actually apply a credit not to some underlying asset as such, it's to apply it to a percentage uplift. So it's a consumer price index approach where you would identify a basket of metrics, and those metrics that are selected at a project level. So that means that the way in which the success of your project is being measured is optimized to the purpose of your project. So that's quite fundamental. So that's very different from trying to twist your project to look really exciting for carbon. It's to say, in this case, we know that riparian woodlands will have significant benefits to water quality and temperature, to river fish population, and in many cases support reductions in flood risk. So these measures can be put into play. The only measure you can't put in there for WALLACEA Trust methodology is the carbon itself, and that's to allow that to be stacked rather than bundled with this particular credit. And then what you do is you need to track baseline and continue to monitor all of the metrics you've decided to put into your credit, and a median percentage uplift is assessed. So what could this look like in terms of potential players in the market? So we've got a number of standards being developed, but they're very much in development. Plan VIVO, Value Nature, who are based in South Africa, and I think many of you might have been at the conference in London where Credit Nature launched their token. All of these are types of biodiversity credit methodologies. What we then have is a question around marketplace and brokers, and so I've listed a few potential organisations there, including Climate Impact Partners. Kirsty Schneeberger will be part of the panel to talk about their potential future role in this. But also the very nature of it is you kind of have this potential double role of someone who's providing a standard and also effectively acting as a marketplace or broker. But in terms of where the innovation lies, my observation is that there's many conservation approaches and technology already developed. Many of them, though, have yet to be fully verified from a carbon perspective. So the same question will be here: is how quickly can some of these conservation approaches be verifiable methods for the biodiversity market. We then just have some terminology for people. So here I won't read to this, but this is sourced from the UNDP. Just early thinking about how do we define a biodiversity credit. So in short, it's a tradable unit representing biodiversity claim, which will need to be defined using a scientific methodology. And the key difference from a regulated offset credit is this idea that we're not presupposing existence of equivalence. And then another slide donated by UNDP is to also think about why it's so important for us to have this workshop today. There are so many things which we still need to be able to discuss and understand in terms of a credit design which would work for Scotland, and also what the market regulation implications would be. So all of the things listed on this slide, we don't have the answers for yet. We need to understand and develop this together. Okay, so we've managed to get through our presentation. I hope the presentation wasn't too quick and people were able to absorb the information, but it's good news because I thought I was going to take 20 minutes and I've only taken 10, which is fantastic, and we're going to bag that by starting the panel session 10 minutes early, which would hopefully give us more time on our breakouts as well. So what I'd like to do now is to hand the driving seat over to Patrick Jean-Martel to open up the panel discussion.
Thank you, Simon. That's great news. But so tell me, how long do you want us to have the panel session for?
I think let's allow us half an hour still.
Okay.
But if we need a bit longer, we can always consider that as well.
Perfect. So good morning, everyone. Patrick Jean-Martel, Environmental Green Finance Manager for NatureScot. I'm very pleased to have you join us in this meeting. I'm sitting amongst a panel of great people coming from a wide range of perspectives on this topic, so the discussion should be quite interesting. Maybe I can allow each one of these panelists to introduce themselves when they start speaking, so we don't waste any time. So maybe if I start with Georgie Nelson from Aberdeen, can I ask you, who do you think the potential buyers of these voluntary biodiversity credits could be in the future, and what would be their main objectives when buying these credits?
Hi Hi everyone, Georgie Nelson, Head of Environmental Social Governance at Aberdeen. So on your first question, I think there'll be a variety of interested parties, but really for me, it's the large corporates which are developing their nature strategies and want to be nature positive and meet their goals. So a lot of corporates are in early stages in developing that, but some are already quite advanced, and you see the L'Oreal Nature Fund, for example. So I think what will be interesting, though, is to see how that does interplay with the carbon units, because a lot of corporates are already buying carbon units and they want to have biodiversity as part of that carbon unit. So if we're stacking them and having a separate biodiversity unit, that's good because it means that more money is going into those marketplaces, but that's an adjustment that needs to happen in the mindset of corporates, I think. Also, just one point I wanted to add in terms of jurisdictions of where these corporates want to buy these biodiversity credits, I'm seeing a trend that they want these to be local. So, you know, we're a Scottish company and we want to start investing, you know, where our company's based, but we also do need to understand that we need to invest into obviously developing countries as well.
Okay, so that's interesting, and you're raising, I think, a very good question that Russia kind of mentioned in the chat around the possibility to stack the biodiversity credit with the carbon credits, and that's kind of a tricky question because of the additionality issue. So as you probably are aware, this additionality rule states that if you're already paying for the restoration with a specific target like carbon credits in mind, you cannot stack additional revenue streams from the restoration for additional benefits that you're creating, unless you are specifically adding additional resources to develop other benefits. So for example, taking peatland restoration, you restore the peatland, you raise the water table, and you're effectively restoring the peat that way. But you're also increasing the biodiversity within that area. But you were doing that for the carbon credits, so you cannot actually sell the biodiversity credits that would be potentially generated. So that's something that I think has to be addressed, because sometimes there would be a case for this additional revenue stream to actually allow the restoration because the cost would be higher, but in other places that's not what would happen. So does anyone in the panel has some views on this question around additionality? I'm just asking this openly. Or Tim, I think you have your hand raised, so please introduce yourself.
Can you hear me okay? Unfortunately,
Yes.
I'm having to travel whilst doing this. So I'm being driven. I'm
Okay, good.
Okay, so for the additionality point, I agree. If you have a project that's already funded for carbon, you can't then just back add biodiversity, because you're getting an awful lot of the biodiversity uplift as a result of as an accident, basically, of your carbon restoration project. However, what you can do is, if there are projects that can't run on carbon alone, can't run on biodiversity alone, then you can stack them, because that provides the additionality, because without both sources of funding, that project would not have happened. Where I part company on this additionality argument is where people are trying to say, well, you know, if you're doing a forest restoration, some of the benefit is for carbon, some of it is for biodiversity. Well, you try disaggregating that. I mean, I think that's next to impossible. So I would use the financial argument in every case for identifying whether you've got the additionality. And we on this basis around the world. So it's already happening, Patrick. It's, you know, the market is there, the people are coming along in large numbers wanting to buy these sorts of credits. So happy to talk more about that later if it's of interest.
Thank you, Tim. Yes, so you're saying basically there are some cases where this would be technically possible by passing the additionality test. And I think that's, for example, one possibility for peatland restoration. For example, we know that beyond 2050, the Science-Based Target Initiative is kind of saying that we cannot, we should not be using avoided emission credits. So credit generated by peatland restoration, for example, to offset residual emissions. So maybe for these restorations to be able to happen, we could transition to biodiversity credits generated after 2050. I'm just throwing this idea out in case that would make sense for anyone. Maybe we can pass on to the next question. Kirsty, if you're okay, could you tell us what are the key motivators for ESG CSR spending, for example, around the biodiversity credits compared to what we see on the carbon offset market or carbon plus? What would be the additional benefits?
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm Kirsty Schneeberger. I head up partnerships at Climate Impact Partners. We're also a project developer as well as selling credits in the market to our corporates. So building on some of what Georgie was saying as well, we see a trend in the market from our corporate clients where we have been presenting them with carbon solutions. Obviously, a driver for them is increasing pressure to do something around climate, increasing sort of soft regulation, certainly thinking about the work of the TCFD and the pressure that's being applied there for them to be disclosing what they're doing on their carbon footprints and just sort of social pressure. We're very familiar with that. But also increasingly, corporate clients, particularly those in the food and beverage industry, those in the pharmaceutical industry, those who rely heavily on supply chains, global supply chains that are so inextricably linked to healthy ecosystems and healthy biodiversity, sort of natural systems that form part of their supply chains, are very interested in understanding what their role can be in enhancing, promoting, restoring nature, biodiversity, and some of those ecosystems. They recognize that it is a serious and significant risk for them, a financial risk as well as an ESG risk. And so there is corporate demand for what we are seeing in the carbon market is these co-benefits, where we develop projects around carbon. It's already been mentioned. Those projects that also have additional biodiversity benefits do attract a sort of price premium, and they are in high demand because there is a recognition that this isn't just about climate and biodiversity. And so building on that, a driver to develop a sort of separate biodiversity market is, and I think other panelists, Tim and Georgie have already sort of alluded to this, there is a real sense that sort of separating out those two issues is going to help us deal with and tackle these twin crises, because funding needs to channel and flow out to carbon projects as well as biodiversity projects. And the risk is that if you're only relying on a co-benefit being stacked into a carbon credit, then you're not unlocking the real potential or the real sort of value and amount of funding that could be flowed out to projects if there were a separate or parallel, complementary, or we want to phrase it and think about designing it, biodiversity market. And then just to touch a little bit on that point about similarly what others have said around additionality, Tim and I and perhaps others were just on an earlier call with the World Economic Forum, the working group that is looking at something called biodiversity integrity principles, and one of the points of discussion was around the limitations of the principle of additionality. If we were to just sort of copy and paste how it works in the carbon market into a biodiversity market, there's a real risk that a lot of good and excellent projects that are doing nature restoration already might be ineligible if that additionality point or that additionality bar was set too high. You need to demonstrate, for example, that the finance coming from the biodiversity market needs to be required to do the work. Well, we know that there's a lot of excellent biodiversity and other restoration work that's already been done, and you don't want to risk those being ineligible for this kind of financing. And so when we're designing the principle around additionality and thinking about that, how can you account for ongoing management of a project as well, and it not needing to be a sort of standing start. There is no funding available or no financing available at all for this kind of project, and the finance comes in to sort of kickstart it. So that's a very live and active discussion and yeah, be very interested to hear in the later workshop what people's views on it are.
Thank you, Kirsty. Yeah, I think it's really the heart of the topic, this issue around additionality, because we have this established carbon market. And yeah, we want to do the same with the biodiversity, but obviously there is some very close relationship between the two, and we still have to differentiate them somehow. I want to bring in Chris White in the discussion at this stage. Sorry, Chris. The question that maybe you could help us answer to could be, do you have an idea about the potential volume that we can expect to see around the demand for these biodiversity credits coming from the corporates, especially with the TNFD's recommendation in the horizon, not talking about actual numbers, but in terms of qualitative assessment of the demand? What's your point on the view?
I definitely think there's demand for this, and the clients that we're talking to, I mean, if we're talking to clients about selling carbon credits, it's great that people want to buy a new woodland and with young trees or storing peat bog, but people also, I think, want to be part of a project which has got some areas of really high value habitat that's being protected and improved alongside that. So people kind of, the clients that we work with, they want to be able to go to the site that they're investing in, talk about the trees that they're planting, and then also talk about the woodlands that they're protecting and all the other stuff beyond it. And one massive field just of kind of new growing trees and sort of providing them what they want. So I think people are looking more and more to buy into projects which are delivering something exciting, and then moving kind of like towards buying projects and people rather than just the credits themselves, and using the credits as a vehicle to get into that project. I think the TNFD thing is going to follow what happens with the climate markets, and I think you can kind of follow that progress of TCFD came out and it led to increasing sort of interest among companies to set targets, and everyone's got a net zero target now. Everyone's fluent in talking about carbon credits, and now people are really pushing up demand, and you can see the carbon market sort of blowing up at the moment because of that. I think the same thing will happen for TNFD, and I think people will, in 2, 3, 4, 5 years be committing to nature positive targets and looking for credits to buy. So I don't think it's a question of if this will happen. I think when and how we do it. But yeah, the demand's definitely going to be there. That was a bit of a waffle.
No, thank you, Chris. That's great. And I think you're touching also a point about the potentiality of having the TNFD switching from a voluntary framework to something that's going to be more mandatory. And we see that in Europe, there is kind of this trend of thought going on, and this would be really something that would be pushing the inclusion of biodiversity into the decision-making process of the companies following the TNFD framework, and that's something that's I think needs to happen anyway. Sarah, so Sarah is coming from the more of the marine environments side of things, and I think there is a lot of potential in biodiversity for the marine environment. So this is a new field that's kind of catching up with the land-based project in a sense. What's your general point of view around the potentiality for the marine environment to bring in these biodiversity credits, and yeah, what's your take on this?
I mean, I think you're spot on there, Patrick. We are playing catch up in some respects. So SMEEF, the Scottish Marine Environmental Enhancement Fund, is largely sitting in philanthropy at the moment. We are bringing money in and going back out again as grants, but we're very keen to move into more that lovely phrase of agile space, where we can be that kind of pathfinder funder for some of these exciting projects. But when Chris was talking there, I was just thinking, this is the opportunity for marine. We suffer from out of sight, out of mind. Once you're under the surface of the water, once you're more than a stone's throw offshore, people really disengage with what's going on. when it comes to interesting, exciting projects, there is a mystery there, which is of great benefit to us in terms of being able to sell that to investors and to say there is something really exciting, really thrilling about investing in the marine environment and looking at the kind of credits market within marine. So I think for once our Achilles heel is actually something that is really interesting. But there are so many unknowns about how we go about doing that, and it's really a call to this audience to say SMEEF is now established, we are set up, we are running, we're credible, transparent, all of those good things. We are very keen to find partners that we can work with to work out what does this all mean for us in the marine environment? What would a test case look like? How could that be put forward and how could that be measured and monitored and made something of? So it was really a kind of to fly the flag for marine, but also to call for partners to come and talk to us. We're very keen to have those discussions.
Thank you, Sarah. Yes, and I think that one of the issues with the marine environment, as for many other environments, is that it's a very complex ecosystem, and it's very difficult to assess the carbon sequestration rate, or where does it go, if it's ultimately really stored or not. And maybe in that context, biodiversity would be an alternative solution to generate some revenue stream for some of the projects that carbon for now is kind of struggling to establish.
It is, it's true. I mean, we've got massive complexity, but we've also got the great benefit of a limited number of landowners. You know, so there's pros and cons, and we need to think about this in a different sort of way to land management.
That's a good point. Very good point. Christian, I see you have your hand raised, and I saw you made a comment earlier in the chat that was about integrating the soil index. I think in the metric WALLACEA was displaying, and I think that's a good point. And I wonder if actually the WALLACEA doesn't have a wider range of metrics we can choose from, but that's something. I'll let you ask your question. Sorry.
Yes. No. Okay. So just an update for the few of you that do know me out there. I'm traveling to the province of Saskatchewan in Canada on November 8th. I will be engaging in meetings with the provincial government ministries and agencies in regards to their explorations on top of the Canadian federal government's first announcement in July of this year towards investigating carbon markets. And those of you know me, I'm an old record, and I'm a solids, liquids, gases, ecosystem, holistic, circular economy of resources and data guy. And we look at this, we were funded by IUK to develop a circular economy prospect, which we've refined now. And I think it's most important to understand the full influence of the outer market impacts of the technology developments and the way that we will be able to capture that complex marine data, which includes a little conversation I had with Professor Mark Reed around the dissolved organic carbon in the peatlands expressly, and how we now actually do have some really cool mobile technology that we can start monitoring this 24/7 a day right now. And I'm also part of a very large UKRA DEFRA future farming for robotics, remote monitoring in hyperspectral for ground truth, which will help with the validation of the range of unprovable satellite data when kind of high uncertainty models that are being generated today to deliver the financial impacts. And so I think we need to accommodate now. And you want us to do a change in thinking. And to remember, I come from a commercial. We're an SME. You know, we sell products, we make products, we work with farmers, we work with corporations. We're discussing with Shell, British American Tobacco right now around potential capital projects, which these areas are all super relevant. And our approach, and those of you who don't know me, I come from 35 years in the Hollywood movie industry. And you get one day to get it right. You get one shot at this thing. And $6 million days. That's it, $6 million one day, you better make it work. So we tend to simplify, look at the high logic baseline. I would suggest that in biodiversity, to undermine the focus of this false carbon financial market, which is going to develop into a carbon bubble due to the range of unregulated, independent brokerages running a wild around the world.
Christian, I'm afraid I'll have to cut across you because we
sorry. So the question is this: should we not be actually getting a step back in biodiversity now, because this is where soil and water meet? Yes. And so the marine is highly dependent. And to do that, if we include all the gases, are we not then in a better position to define a true eco-biodiversity value? Thank you. Sorry for running.
Thank you, Christian.
No, thank you, Christian. I think it's a good question, and also around the importance of technology. It's going to be data is so central to everything we're talking about, and we need the technology to help us in this endeavor. Tim, sorry, you had your hand raised for a while. Are you still with us? Tim? Maybe we're gonna go.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Is it okay? Is it? I'm in the middle of Edinburgh now, so it should be working. I just wanted to come back on the fact there was a comment made about why don't we include other things in the WALLACEA Trust biodiversity metric. We do. In soil health, soil biodiversity is included in projects for where it's relevant. So, for example, where we're looking at the avoided loss of biodiversity in Transylvania meadows, the threat to those meadows is then being ploughed up, and therefore there's a threat to the soil biodiversity. And we include soil biodiversity as one of the functional metrics that you would use. The advantage of the approach that we're using is that what you do is you select a basket of metrics that reflects the conservation objectives of what you're trying to do, or where you are in the world in terms of ecoregions and types of habitats that you're working with. So that means that the exact metrics that you measure will vary between projects, because what you're doing for a Transylvania meadow is very different to what you do in a marine reserve in Turkey, for example. You need a completely different basket of metrics. And that's why the biodiversity unit is set as a percentage uplift in the median value of a basket of at least 5 metrics. And that's expressed as a per hectare value. So that means that it's not that we don't include soil health. We wouldn't include soil health on a Turkish marine reserve, but we would include it on an agricultural project in the UK or in Romania, for example.
Yeah, thank you, Tim. So you're basically saying that this is a way to be flexible, to allow for a biodiversity metric to emerge in different types of habitat locations that have specific context and need specific metrics to highlight what's happening, but still have something framework that would be like the same everywhere in a sense. The same methodology would be applied in a sense.
And it's as Simon said, it reflects the consumer price index. The consumer price index is a basket of goods and services we all use, but every country has a different one. And it doesn't matter because that's what they're buying. We're doing exactly the same for conservation. But incidentally, the way the applications work, when they go through to Plan VIVO, they then go to a technical advisory committee, and NERC has just given £1 million to Nottingham University to set up a technical advisory group so that when applications come in, they're reviewed by that technical group to make sure that nobody's cheating, nobody's trying to cheat the system by picking easy metrics, that they are fully encompassing what the conservation objectives are. So it's a peer review process in exactly the same way as when you publish papers.
Okay, that's an interesting take. Thank you, Tim. Kirsty, you had your hand raised.
Thanks, Patrick. Very quickly, just on this point of the marine environment. In the voluntary carbon market, we're looking at it as blue carbon, and some of the work that we're doing in the UK is around designing a salt marsh code and a seagrass code. But the advantage of designing it now is that we can think of it from both a carbon and biodiversity perspective. So actually this will be quite a nice example of where you have one code that can deliver those twin aims. And so you can look at, you know, the biodiversity aspect of it, as well as the carbon aspect of it. So just wanted to mention that. And then I saw in the chat that the CCB was referenced, the Community Climate and Biodiversity methodology under VERA that can be incorporated into the design of a carbon project. But also there's something called SD Vista. So SD as in Sustainable Development Program, the VISTA program, which looks at sustainable development benefits, which also can encompass some of those biodiversity pieces as well. Just wanted to reference that.
Thank you very much, Kirsty. Eleanor, hi.
Hi, thank you. I'm afraid I have to drop off a bit early, so I thought I'd get a word, and I put something in the chat, but just to summarize what I was saying is I really think that before we start getting into the detail of offsets, carbon offsets are not in a vacuum. They are the last part in the jigsaw of demonstrating a corporate's journey towards net zero. And the point of carbon trading is to say, well, we've got these hard to reduce emissions. In the meantime, we're going to do this other thing to mitigate it. As I'm sure you're all aware, the whole carbon world has been on a huge journey of seeing corporates just buying offsets. Initially, the greenwash challenge is about the credibility of the offset, where those trees actually planted. And now we've got very robust systems for offsets. Now most greenwash type claims are actually about, well, that's all very well, you're buying offsets, but is it really, you know, you're not really doing the homework you should be doing. You should be focusing on your reductions. And that's starting to come through to now we're seeing a far more emphasis on the robustness of the company's own decarbonisation. We've got things like science-based targets, giving companies a real framework within which they can make claims about offsets, rather than just saying, oh, we're carbon neutral. They can say, well, we're on the road to net zero and this is how we're using offsetting as part of that. And I think it's really dangerous to jump into anything to do with biodiversity. And maybe you've all done some homework on this and I've missed it, but I think it needs said right at the start, what kind of framework will this fit into? I know this is voluntary, not compliance, but that's the case with you know, carbon as well. If we're not going to talk about equivalence, you know, how are these things going to be used? However robust the thing that you're selling, what kind of claim does it give the corporate to make? It certainly can't let them make any claim about being nature positive, because they can't use their non-equivalent biodiversity purchase to offset anything else. Are we just, you know, so that was my my cheeky question is, are we really trying to tackle biodiversity decline here? In which case, why aren't we focusing on biodiversity and supply chains, which is really coming up the carbon agenda with the new greenhouse gas land use guidance? We could be looking at that for biodiversity and looking at anyone producing food or land-based products to tackle their biodiversity impact first, or developers or anyone. Why are we starting with the offsets? It seems to me completely the wrong place to start. And the way I think it would look to anyone looking at this from the outside is that actually we're seeing an opportunity to, you know, it's something I could use as much as anyone, but an opportunity to make some quick money out of words like biodiversity and the PR value. So that's a bit, hopefully not too challenging, but it's maybe something that you can discuss in the breakout sessions.
Yeah,
I know there are frameworks developing, but I think we need to set this discussion very much in that wider framework of tackling the global biodiversity decline and how corporates take part in that.
Yeah, Eleanor, that's a great point, and I see in the chat that you've got a lot of support in making this point.
Yes, thank you.
And I think that's also kind of the feeling we got through the Scottish government's idea of trying for now to stay away from the offsetting route and really looking at the biodiversity of uplift in itself, not as a way exactly to avoid all the risks around greenwashing and so on, and the mitigation hierarchy that's so important. But I think this is kind of the way it's taking for now, at least. So with the CIFTech challenge, I think that's kind of the way we're looking at it, not through the offsetting lens, but really about creating a market for biodiversity, but not with this idea of offsetting negative impact that we had in the first place, but really looking at generating this uplift and valuing the uplift in itself. What time is it? Simon, I don't see any more questions. Do you want to make a break, or do we have time for another question?
Yeah, I think Louise has put her hand up.
Oh, sorry, I didn't see that.
Got time for one more question and then we'll have a break.
Okay, so Louise.
Yeah, no, I just want to know whether the thought is that the biodiversity credits would be tradable, or whether the company would enter into a contract with the project on the ground.
That's a good question.
I sort of feel like tradability is surely, it's hard to avoid it becoming a bubble and a situation where rarity of credits is at a bonus, you know, because the fewer there are, the more valuable the individual ones get.
That's a good point. And the thing is that you need some kind of aggregation mechanism or intermediaries at some point to make the market more liquid for buyers to be able to find more easily these credits. But then these credits are also very specific, especially in the case of biodiversity. All the credits are not going to be equal depending on the habitat they were generated in and the type of restoration that was implied. Unlike carbon, the measure it's never going to be the same. So it's less fungible, as we said earlier. So I wonder if in that case you're right. Maybe making this something that's not tradable could be something that would make more sense. But there again, then we have the risk of having a market that's not liquid enough or problem aggregating the different projects, so we can actually have bigger buyer coming more easily into the market. But that's a very valid question that we have to discuss.
Shall we take a reply to that from Tim, and then we'll have a 5-minute break, and then we'll start our first breakout session at 11:30.
Yeah, sure. Tim, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to pick up with Louise's point. But I think you need both, to be honest. I think there are companies that will want to retire them as to have credits in the bank, as it were, for when biodiversity footprinting and finding gets sorted out. And besides, if they're spending money on a project, they want to know what their biodiversity uplift is. And many companies are simply using it just as an accounting system. You know, they can identify how much benefit they've added by funding on a particular project. But the development of a secondary market is crucial, I'm afraid, Louise, because if you really want this to work on a significant scale, there's going to have to be a secondary market. And we are finding that we're getting buyers for the credits that are not wanting to retire them themselves, but to potentially to trade them in the same way as they trade with carbon credits. But for that, you need independent validation and verification. And most of the list of supposed alternatives to biodiversity credits that Simon listed are not methods that are going through independent validation and verification. They're methods that are developed by individual organizations, and you can run them through those organizations, and they're perfectly good, some of those. But if you want to get a proper market going, there's got to be independent validation and verification of the credits before issuance. So that's where Plan VIVO comes in, which is a Scottish certification body, by the way. So you are leading, Simon, in that sense. You have the first independent, validated, verified credits in the world happening in Scotland.
Okay, what I have to do is thank Patrick for an excellent, and the panel members for an excellent discussion. We're going to take a 5-minute break, so that's everyone back here by 11:32. A comfort break, and when we come back, we're going to break out into breakout rooms of around 6 or 7, and so that's an opportunity to continue the conversation, for everyone to everyone's voices to be heard, and you know, to provide your reflections on what the scope of this opportunity looks like. So without further ado, yeah, if everyone can be back on time within 5 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you.